the program, remembering, acknowledging that it passed away in the year 2020. One that is alive and well and writing some great stories about your Philadelphia Eagles is our buddy John McMullen. John, let's start with this particular week. Now we've got Jalen Mills on the COVID list. Have we seen the last of him? Let's start right there. Or does he come back?
Well, I think there's potential. I think a lot of things have to happen. Once Jeffrey Lurie decides what he wants to do with this coaching staff, I think if Jim Schwartz is back, and I think Jim Schwartz is back if Doug Peterson is back, I think Jim would love to have him back. Jalen's one of those guys that, for whatever reason, I don't know, and I just put this on Twitter this week. It's ironic, and it was before he went on the COVID list. He's one of those players that the fan base has never really gotten behind, and it's sort of a strange one to me because he's a seventh-round pick. He's an overachiever. He's a team leader. He's grown into that. He's so versatile. He doesn't cost a ton of money.
And he's got green hair.
And he's got green hair, yeah. He's got a personality. I mean, what more do you want? I think he's a really important part of this defense. I think Jim trusts him. You saw it last week. I mean, the guy, he starts at safety. He's got to move to corner because Mike Jacquette's having so many issues. And, look, I don't want to compare anybody to Malcolm Jenkins. He's not that type of player. But he's been the most versatile Eagles defender. He's played box linebacker at times. He's strong safety, free safety, slot corner, outside corner. Those guys aren't easy to find. I'll just say that.
If Mills isn't back, or actually, let's go down the line. Roby Coleman underachieved, obviously, as an Eagle in my view of it. Anyway, do we have a complete overhaul back there, or what are some of the guys? Do you honestly think Schwartz comes back? Let's start with that, and then let's get to each of the individual guys.
Well, I think if you look at Jeffrey's history since the Super Bowl and you go back to last year in Mike Rowe, I mean, if he deems something disappointing, there's going to be a scapegoat. And obviously, I mean, this team made the playoffs last year. They made the run, and they got in, and they almost beat Seattle. Probably would have beat Seattle if Carson didn't have the concussion early in the game. There was still a scapegoat. So if you're going to end with 4 or 5 wins, there's going to be a scapegoat, and I think there's going to be a high-profile one. I think the most logical, because things went off the rails in Arizona, is special teams and Dave Phipp. And by the way, I don't think he deserves to lose his job. I just wrote about this in Philly Voice, and the fact that, look, I mean, you have to look at the whole sample size. And, Dave got here in 2013 with Chip Kelly, so he's been here even longer than Doug and Jim. Over that span, up until this season, Eagles special teams have been near the top in the league consistently. They have the second most special teams touchdowns over that span, second most blocks over that span. And, to me, Ricky, it's about personnel. I say that's the same thing about Jim. People don't realize this. This has been a top 10 scoring defense, a top 10, number 1 rushing defense from 2016 to 2019. Number 1, top 3 third down defense, top 5 red zone defense. So what I said, the grass isn't always greener on the other side of the fence. It's very unlikely if you do get rid of these guys, the successors are going to be more successful.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand, and obviously they can only do so much with the personnel that they're given, and when you go down, as deep into the depth chart as they have, that really affects a guy like Dave Phipp, who's really relegated to the bottom of the bottom because there are guys from the practice squad basically that are out there week to week.
Yeah. I mean, the best example of this is Bill Belichick in New England. Does anyone want to step up and say that's a bad coach? Because I don't want to step up and say he's a bad coach. That's the greatest coach that's ever lived. And guess what? They're not having a good season. Now, it took 2 decades, but the cycle finally hit the Patriots. And we all know sports is cyclical when it comes to personnel. If you don't have top-tier talent, look, the Lombardi Trophy is off the table. You're not going to be in the mix for that. It's just as simple as that, and that's where the Eagles are, and that's why I say it's more personnel-driven than anything else. Now, as you know, Ricky, not everything's in a vacuum. So if you give Bill Belichick the same talent as everybody else, he's probably going to do a little bit more with it. But again, unless you have significant talent, and the Eagles have made too many mistakes in the draft, too many mistakes in free agency. You mentioned Nickel Roby-Coleman. That just hasn't worked out. We know the draft picks. Everybody talks about it all the time. So many haven't worked out. That's the bigger issue.
We're talking to John McMullen, all things Eagles. You wrote a piece that compares Alex Smith to maybe the type of quarterback performance that Doug Peterson is looking for. Give me the genesis of what you were thinking. And obviously, we're not sure yet if Smith is going to be the quarterback or it'll be a Cole Heineken there on what's the kid's name? Drew Heineken.
Yeah,
Cole Heineken on Sunday night. Was it Taylor Heineken?
Taylor
What's the guy's
Heineke. And by
Taylor
the way,
Heineken.
He got signed. He was back at Old Dominion. That's where he went to college. He was finishing up his engineering degree. He had turned the page on his professional football career, and quarter in the swear jar. Washington football team. They signed him in December, brought him back. He wasn't even on the 53 until I think December 16th, and now he's potentially starting in a game they win and they're in the postseason. Ultimately, I think because of what Alex is and who he is, he's going to try to play. But those calf injuries are tricky, and when he's already missed a couple weeks, that's an indication. It's pretty significant. So I don't know how healthy he's going to be. But as far as the article goes, remember, Doug had Alex Smith in Kansas City. So if you look at this guy, early his career in San Francisco, the number one overall pick, struggled. Then he kind of turned the corner. It was 2011. And he's just been winning ever since. He won in San Francisco. He won in Kansas City. And people forget before he got hurt in Washington in 2018, they were 6-4, that bad team. They were going to win the NFC East with Alex Smith. And Doug kind of talked about him when he was doing his conference call with the Washington media. And he tends to be a little bit more forthcoming. He's more guarded with us. So I always like to look at those opposition calls. And he talked about Alex, and he said, this guy just wins games. And he wins games because he doesn't make mistakes. And one thing Doug has consistently said in the Carson Wentz era is let the offense work for you. And he talked about don't get behind the sticks, pre-snap penalties, check downs. It's not sexy. Being a game manager is never sexy, Ricky, but it wins you a lot of games. And Doug misses that with both his quarterbacks, by the way, Carson and Jalen Hurts.
We're talking to John McMullen on everything having to do with the Eagles. John, where can everybody read your work? This particular article is in Sports Illustrated, but you're right, for several locations.
Yeah, you can find me at Sports Illustrated, Eagles Maven with our buddy Ed Kratz. We do that together. Also, Philly Boys, my columns every Monday and Thursday at phillyboys.com. So locally, that's where you can find my Eagles coverage.
Of the guys on this roster that have some tenure, okay, who do you expect to be a casualty, whether it be performance, contract? I'm looking at maybe Zach Ertz, maybe playing his last game as an Eagle tomorrow. I don't think we'll see Jason Peters in an Eagle uniform again until at someday when they honor him. They'll probably put him in the Eagle, Ring of Honor or whatever it may be. Eagle Hall of Fame,
I think there's a number of logical ones. Jason Peters is going to be back, and you're right. He's an all-time great Eagle, and I think people will remember that. once the stain of the last couple years, and by the way, he wasn't even bad last season. It was just this season. Alshon's not going to be back. Deshaun's not going to be back. So enjoy that 81-yard touchdown. Just hasn't worked out in his second incarnation. But I do think you bring up Zach Ertz, and Zach is not happy. He was not happy with the contract. If you go back to that Seattle playoff game, and you remember, Ricky, he played with a lacerated kidney and broken ribs, should not have been out there. He felt he put it out there for the team, and he felt he wasn't respected. And from day one, it's been an issue in this season. He's obviously had his worst season as a pro. And, yeah, I think the Eagles are going to try to move on because they do have Dallas Goedert. It's more cost-effective. And they want to play more 11 personnel. They want to play with 3 receivers on the field. And at some point, if you want to do that, you got to put the guys out there.
You can sense, John, you've been around long enough to get a sense of when a team is on a slide overall in culture and just in overall atmosphere, or when a team is on the upswing. And we've witnessed it. We've lived through it with the Eagles, with the end of the Andy era, with the 3-year Chip Kelly era, and now through Doug Peterson's years here as head coach. What does your gut sense tell you that this organization, and I know it's different every year, but you can get a feel of whether things are on the rise or on the downhill slope. Where is this organization as we go into the calendar year of 2021?
Well, it is a little bit more difficult because of the pandemic and because it's so strange, and there is no time in the locker room. There is no camaraderie. Even the players, they don't get together outside the building. They now have virtual meetings that basically go to the NovaCare complex, practice, and leave the NovaCare complex, and then have meetings via Zoom and MS Teams and things like that. So I do think for everybody, they're no different than anybody else, though. So, but as a whole, when you talk about culture and camaraderie and things like that, I do think this is a hiccup that maybe necessarily you can't take that much out of. But what you can look at the organization. And, look at this week. On Monday, Doug Peterson is talking about he wants to have his voice heard in personnel issues. Wednesday, he scales it back and says, no, I don't want to make any waves. I do think we're starting to see that disconnect in the front office between the coaching staff and Howie Roseman and the personnel side. And that's what happens with bad teams. What happens? You start to point fingers. That's just natural. Mm-hmm. Happens in every city.
Yeah, I can sense that, for lack of a better term, that the foundation is a little shaky. And I think maybe that might be the impetus to get Jeffrey Lurie to make a splash of some sort. I don't know whether it's Dorsey that they put in some sort of position. Connor Barwin's part of the organization. Maybe they elevate him. If it's Doug that they move away from. My gut tells me that it's time to make a splash. But at the same time, Jeffrey Lurie's not been known over the years to do things on impulse. But maybe if they lose on Sunday night, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at last season, he really decided that Mike Rowe had to go after that Miami game. And that was kind of impulsive because he should have saved his job with the late run. Granted, it was against bad teams in the NFC East, but nonetheless, you become a playoff team and the head coach wanted to keep you. So I do think Doug should have been able to make that decision and keep the guy he wanted to keep. I think that was the first sort of, I don't want to call it an earthquake, but maybe a little bit of a tremor to indicate things weren't going maybe the way they should. I do think Jeffrey's like every other owner in this league. And what happens in this league, because it's such a public-facing industry, and you have to deal with the fans, you have to deal with the media, and it's real. It's a real sort of tidal wave coming against you. So what do? Once you have a bad season, you don't talk about solving the problems. You scapegoat somebody. And that's what I said at the beginning of this call. Somebody's getting scapegoated. It might be Fit.
Okay.
It might be sports. It might even be Doug. On the personnel side, it might be Andy Weidel. But somebody is going.
Interesting, because there are a few of those names there that if they go,
I didn't say Howie though.
Yeah,
Howie
the fan base, it would probably go right by the fan base, because a lot of these names aren't the everyday household names that people discuss on this radio station and in other fan forums. So and Andy Weidel could Andy who the fan base would probably be asking that question. I got a minute left. The quarterback situation. What do you think they do? Can these guys both coexist? I guess that's being redundant. Can they coexist when we get ready for training camp, whatever version of that? I heard today the Players Association say they loved the way it happened this year. Why should we go back
you
to
knew that was coming.
Yeah, why should we go back to the old way?
Yeah,
we can put out a great product, with whatever. A couple of weeks to get ready with no preseason games.
Yeah, coaches are not going to like that. I just asked you sports this week. That's the one thing you pointed to, not having the guys in the off season. So, yeah, coaches aren't going to like that, but players are definitely going to push for that, and they're going to point to that. You knew they were. But as far Carson's going to be back. I mean, Jeffrey Lurie is not. The record for dead money in this league is $21 million. He's not the guy who's going to set the precedent and turn that to $32 million. He's just not that guy. He's not George Steinbrenner. He's not Jerry Jones. He's not going to say, okay, forget about budgets, especially in a year. Remember, because of the pandemic, the Eagles have lost about $250 million of revenue. They're not taking on $32 million in dead money. It's just not going to happen. So Carson's going to be back. I think he's going to be given every opportunity to be the starter. And Jalen Hurts is on the second year of his rookie contract. He's going to be the backup. And, yeah, they're going to have to coexist.
Interesting. My friend, Happy New Year. We will see you on Sunday night one more time before we head into an off season of who knows what. And, when we'll be back, when baseball will be back, when, the NCAA tournament may or may not happen. We'll see as we enter into 2021 in just a matter of hours. I thank you for a couple of minutes. Happy New Year to you and your family, and we'll catch you at the link on Sunday night.
Yeah, you too, Ricky. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to the listeners. Thanks for having me.
You got it. That's John McMullen. You read him in Sports Illustrated, Philly Voice, one of the more talented Eagle beat writers in this town. You heard what he said. He says Wentz will be back, and he makes a lot of sense. He says the Eagles are losing so much money with the lack of revenue this year that the pandemic may be the reason why Carson Wentz may not go anywhere. What do you think of that, Eagle fans? 215-592-9494. We'll go to the break, come back with your phone calls the rest of the way on this final live show of the year 2020. The year in review program will follow me at 10 o'clock. But if you want to get in and say goodbye to the year 2020 and various other things, then do it right now. 215